The Readiness Act is a piece of legislation we've drafted, and it came out of our observations of what the largest challenges that federally employed military spouses face when executing a permanent change of station. This is not a challenge solely faced by military spouses. It's also faced by foreign service families with spouses who are federal employees. And so the Readiness Act actually seeks to create a path for foreign service and military families when they need to execute a PCS. And our scope is really narrowly focused on federally employed military spouses. If you take a look at the whole range of employment issues and challenges military spouses face, it's an iceberg. So this is our little tip of the iceberg that we're trying to make, where we're trying to make a difference, primarily because it feels feasible. This is the federal government. The federal government has the ability to create policy that benefits military spouses. It doesn't require an act of Congress, although in the case of the Readiness Act, it does. It really is what we originally envisioned it as was reverse ladder, and it has morphed into a decision tree. And in that, it is when a supervisor is provided permanent change of station, or as a Navy family, we also have home port changes that aren't PCSs, and so that's included in the legislation as well. It creates this decision tree of either allow the individual to work remotely, transfer them to a position that is remote or can be performed remotely, or transfer them to a new position within the commuting area of the new duty station. And that's an or. And that or is really based on what the employee would like to ask for, but all three of those are included. And that's because maybe I don't want to work from home. Maybe I really want to work in an office environment. And so, it really is up to that individual and that employee to have that conversation. But also, it might be that a job can't be performed remotely. If you work in a secure environment, or you're an admin staff, that's not going to be something that's going to be effective for that organization, that employing organization. And so we've tried to build into the Readiness Act language an understanding that this is a conversation that needs to occur between the employee, the employer, about what's going to work for everybody. And then in addition, there's, a second tier of, if none of those options work, if I can't work remotely and my organization doesn't have an office at my new duty location, but there needs to be a means by which that federal employee, that military spouse, can retain status as a federal employee while they look for a new position. And we envision that as a non-pay, non-duty status, similar to leave without pay. It doesn't cost anything for us to say, hey, let's put them in this non-pay, non-duty status to allow them to check the box, I'm a current federal employee, when they're applying for new jobs. And it makes it much easier for HR to onboard that new employee when they're already in the system. So to that end, the Readiness Act requires that individual be granted 36 months or the length of their service members' orders or foreign service officers' orders at that duty location, whichever is greater. And that really allows them, if I'm moving to Djibouti, and it's unlikely I'm going to be able to get a job there, to not have to worry about that immediately. that you're not under that deadline. And so much of what we found is that these flexibilities already exist and they're just not being utilized. So, we all know remote work is a post-COVID fact of life, and many people have done so successfully in the federal government over the last few years. And so it's just recognizing that we should extend that to military spouses, because they don't choose where they live. It's, I joke, it's not that military spouses want to go live their best digital nomad life on a beach in Mexico. It really is, they're moving somewhere that might have a negative availability of jobs, might not have. I'm currently stationed in Charlottesville, Virginia. There aren't a lot of federal jobs here. It's not DC. It's not a hub or a hive of activity for the federal government. How do I want to phrase this? When we started briefing Congress, we are not professional lobbyists. And so often it was cold calling congressional staff, congressional offices, and trying to get an audience. So the first person that said, hey, we want to help you, we want to draft legislative language, the things that we can't do because we don't work on the Hill, was Representative Crockett. Jasmine Crockett from Texas, the Texas 30, has been our champion from the beginning. And I think in our experience briefing Congress, Representative Crockett, who serves on House Oversight Committee, which has responsibility for the whole of government operations in the House, she is the daughter of a federal employee and she gets it. And so it was so nice to have that yes, that meaningful yes. And then by saying, hey, we have a sponsor, we were able to get more meetings, that doors opened for us a little bit more. And another early proponent of the work that we've been doing is Representative Bacon, Don Bacon from Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. And he is the chair of the House Quality of Life panel, which is taking a look at all of the challenges military families face and their impact on a military family's desire to serve. And so the two of them are our co-sponsors, our co-leads for the Readiness Act. And we have a number of other congressional representatives who have signed on as co-sponsors, initial co-sponsors as well. And we appreciate all of them. Most of them are on HASC, the House Armed Services Committee. And so it's not much of a lift to explain these issues to them because they're already up to their necks in trying to understand everything, childcare, employment, housing, and that's those impacts. In the Senate, it's been a lot harder to get meetings. The stalwart supporter of us from day one has been my home state senator, Senator Dianne Feinstein, and we're very sad to lose her recently. California has the largest number of active duty military families of any state, and so it is a large issue. The Readiness Act has come out of much of that congressional staff engagement in the spring of 2023. But Representative Crockett and 40 other or 39 other members of Congress signed a letter out on June 8th in support of some of our initiatives, just asking OPM, Department of State, and Department of Defense for information. And that was June 8th. And on June 9th, the executive order came out. If I'm going to be frank, I think it was the congressional efforts, and we back briefed them to joining forces. I don't think we knew that they were working on an executive order, but if anything, the executive order required us to pare down all of our initiatives because it was so wide reaching that it encompassed many of the issues we've been briefing congressional staff. So it kind of threw us for a loop because initially what was communicated by the staff we were working with was some training, maybe some policy directives, but not a scope of 40 items that would positively impact military spouses, whether they were federal employees, whether they were seeking federal employment, or they were military spouses seeking employment, particularly some of the child care issues and other items that are addressed therein. I think I would be remiss to not champion the military and veteran service organizations who have helped us as well and provided endorsements. So, of course, that's Boost Our Families, but we've also had a lot of help and support and cheerleading in meetings elsewhere to really draw attention to this legislation from the VFW, the American Legion, MOA, NMFA, National Military Families Association. And then we've also had the support of With Honor, which is a political action committee, the AFGE, which is a union for federal employees, and the AFSA, which is a union for foreign service officers and their families. So, I think those are meaningful endorsements, whether or not readiness goes anywhere. To have the people who are advocating for military spouses, military families recognize that this is an easy solution and get behind it is very meaningful for us because we're not an organization. We're just some military families who saw a problem and wanted to make a difference.